And when you see an array of images like this from around the world, it tells you something about the capacity of people to make images. And this capacity of people to make images and to make really captivating images has nothing to do with art history.
Known to the tap world as
Has nothing at all to do with art history.
And then we have.
And so you take this is the cover of the African Art Catalog at the Manil collection in Houston. And when you see that Chihuahua headdress, that figure from Mali, you say, now that is one of the most beautiful things that was ever made by a human being. And it didn't come out of a relationship with what we know to be modernist art history. It precedes modernist art history in some ways. And so even this notion of how you get toward abstraction, it's like they didn't need to see Brancusi to do that.
Not your ordinary tappers. We're in.
So that when you get to something like art history, what are we talking about then? If those things and a lot of if certain people never show up in this history, what does that mean and what are we talking about? Because we're not really talking about the capacity of people to make stuff. And if it has nothing to do with this art history, because this art history is a structure, it's a system. And it's a system that is designed to privilege some people over other people. And it tells a story of who has the greater capacity to make things than somebody else does. And that's a structure, that's a set of ideas that has nothing to do with whether people can or can't make those kinds of things. And when we're going up against this kind of history, trying to find a way to insert ourselves, the people who are all at the margins, the people who are all left out, the people who this history says the best stuff they ever made is always their ancient stuff. That on the road to modernity, they didn't have anything to add. That's what this history says. And so, and if you are in that space where you're one of those people who seem to have nothing to add because you don't show up in that history, you start out as an ancient civilization and you don't show up again in that history except in a marginal capacity in the late 20th century. What does that say about what you were doing for the last 800 years? Between that? Well, you got to have an answer for that, because that narrative is a powerful narrative and it has a lot to do with the way we understand the value of the world we live in. And so that's when I started making art. I didn't start out just wanting to make some pretty pictures and hoping somebody was going to like them enough to start paying for them. There was so much more at stake in the game than just being able to make pretty pictures, because a lot of people make pretty pictures. But when we think about our history, this is what we think about. This is how it proceeds. It goes from the Greeks, the Romans, up through the Renaissance into Western Europe, then it jumps to America, and we're modern. It's like all of that, it goes abstract. And so, if that's the frame of reference you have, then that because it keeps being repeated, that narrative gets repeated over and over and over again by everybody who takes an art history class. That almost everybody who gets their PhD in art history, this is the narrative they're operating off of. And everybody who goes to art school, this is also the narrative they're operating off of. And so everybody is supposed to readjust themselves and orient their expectations towards this art history narrative. I mean, and the honest thing, it's inescapable, because this is where the power is. I mean, and the power that this represents is in museums like this. It's in the Metropolitan, it's in the Louvre, it's in the Tate, it's in those museums. When you go in there, this is what you see. And so you go there and you say, well, this must be the best stuff that can be done. Because everybody seems to have it, everybody seems to want it, and they keep saying it's so. And so then what do you do about that if you want to make something yourself? So anyway, this is just more of that. Because it matters. mean, it really matters. So let's take these art histories. We go from the advanced up to our pick up a series of narratives of modern art history. But being in or being out of those histories is important. And understanding the terms under which these histories are structured is also really important. Because if you don't understand it, then you're at the mercy of the people who claim they do. And if you're at their mercy, then that means that you are dependent on their generosity for whether you are included or excluded in these things. And so for me, that position of being excluded or excluded based on somebody else's generosity, that is way too vulnerable a position to live in the world under. And so I try to know what these histories are built around, and then I make work that attempts to address the expectations of these histories and then to advance my own agenda at the same time. And it's the reason why I make all of the choices that I make when I make my work. So that Art Since 1900 up in the upper right, I mean, that's sort of the latest in the survey histories of the art, and that's written by a group of people who you could commonly known as the October Gang.
Thoroughly, in terms of like the house, it's very physical and very manual. It's like manual labor, and so it has a lot to do with
heavyweight kind of art historians and philosophers who build this.
I was raised to be a painter. I think the first time I was in the museum, I was like 19 years old.
And the thing is, like in most of these histories, even the history of the American century that was published at the Whitney, I mean, it's like the black presence in there is so slight as to be inconsequential. And so for me, I have to have an answer for why that's so. Now, I'm fortunate enough that they have work of mine at the Whitney. It's in that book. So, I mean, I can say, well, for me, I'm in. You know, everybody else, that's their problem. But it's not. I mean, it's all of our problems. It's my problem too, still. Because it's like, because it says something. It announces the capacity to achieve at a level that is consistent with the expectations of the people who are writing these books. That if they don't put you in them, then you must not be achieving at that level. And if what artists do is simply kind of lock themselves in the room and put their head down and make their work and pray, then that says one thing about what artists do. But if, on the other hand, artists are themselves intellectuals, that means that you can, by a force of will, make an attempt to try and project your idea of what's relevant in this world. You can do that too, just like they can do it. But you can't do it if you don't think you know what they know. So that on some level, when a person goes to art school, you've already signed up when you go to art school to be one of those people. You signed up to be just like Benjamin Buchloh. You signed up to be just like Hal Foster, because they're gonna make you read their stuff. For one thing, they're gonna make you read it, and you might as well understand it. And then you have to say, well, I got something to say about that too. And then you do it. And then you got to figure out a way to project what you do into that space with the same kind of authority that they seem to be trying to project their ideas into that space. Anyway, who is that? Who are those people? Now, I mean, this is in here for the same reason, really. Because I say in the art world, black people in the art world sort of operate within a series of paradoxes. And they are paradoxes of achievement. And this photograph sort of perfectly illustrates what I think are some of these paradoxes. Now, there's one paradox I call the Mae Jemison, the Dr. Mae Jemison paradox. And for people who don't know, Mae Jemison was the first black woman in space. She flew on one of the I think it was Columbia, one of the shuttle missions as a mission specialist. And as a consequence, has found a place in history that is for a lot of black folks is really meaningful. But for me, the paradox is that if you take these men, this is 12 men. These are the 12 men who walked on the moon. And this is back in like 1969, up around 1969, 1970. 12 people had already been on the moon. So in this grand scheme of things, being on the space shuttle just kind of doesn't measure up. That's not an achievement. Being on the space shuttle is not an achievement, especially when people have been on the moon already. And not only on the moon, but in a car back then, they took that up and they drove around. And just Friday, NASA just launched the next generation of their space module. And this is the space capsule they're designing for the inevitable trip to Mars. So this was just a test run, 2 orbits around the Earth and then a splashdown in the Pacific Ocean. But that was just a test to see whether the systems they had designed were going to hold up and whether the heat shields held up, because when you come in from Mars, the angle that you're coming in generates far more heat than the angle you're coming in from space. When you're at a lower
guide tonight is a young man
Earth orbit.
Whom Gregory Hines, no slouch himself at dancing,
solving those problems,
the greatest tap dancer
that will make
that
possible,
Savion,
that's hard work.
Savion,
and that's a real achievement. In the same way that landing the probe on a comet,
take it away,
is a real achievement. And so when you're measuring the kind of success that somebody has been able to realize, if you measure being on the space shuttle against being on the moon or making a thing that lands on a comet or making a capsule that's going to go to Mars, I don't think you can compare the space shuttle mission to any of that. And so if we are oriented towards the lowest level of achievement, meaning on the one hand, you're just glad to be in there, glad to get a shot or to get a ride, then I think that's a dangerous sort of level of expectation to introduce to a population of people. And so so I don't see what I'm doing in the art world any different than what I see happening in something like that, those space missions. So since the art world is a structure, it's a system that's based on ideas, and it's based on ideas that are projected into the space by somebody, then there's nothing particularly impenetrable about those ideas and what they do. And so there's something about what they're doing that's easily comprehensible by anybody who wants to know it. And if you want to know it, then you can kind of get into conversation too. And so my goal had always been to get into conversation, but to get into conversation in a way that projected the black figure image into that space in a way that it couldn't be overlooked or dismissed or denied.